can't, for some reason, I'm not picking you up.
Okay, Clark, he's our tech guru. We'll see if he can get on and maybe.
I'm really sorry.
No, you're okay. We'll have him get on and see if it is me or something else. So I'll text him in a second.
Unfortunate. Can you still hear me? Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
everything. Unfortunately, you're sounding kind of like the Chipmunks to me. I don't know. This morning we were fine. When I talked to, I think it was Clark this morning. I think it was Clark or Joshua, who I spoke to. Everything was fine, and now
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I should try to start it over, shut it down, and start it over, or what I should do.
I'm trying to get I just texted him. Okay.
Hmm. I'm really sorry. I can't understand anything you're saying.
So look at the chat. Let's see, how are we going to do that?
Should I start over again? Okay, I'm
Yes.
gonna try to do that again. I'm gonna try to.
Okay, see if he's back on. Hey, Clark, can you hear me? I need your help making sure that Kurt can get back on. Can you get on the screen with me, buddy?
Yeah, can you hear
Yes, I can.
me right now? Okay, hold on a second.
I come through as a squeaky uh, voice for him. So I want you to get on to see if that's what he gets from you too. Chipmunk. Thanks, Ann. Want to get exact there. So Kurt, if you can hear me, there we go. So am I any better or am I a chipmunk?
Can you hear me? Kurt, you're muted. I'm going to unmute you. Okay, try it now. Can you hear me? I just unmuted you, Kurt. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Everything sounds normal where you are? Yes. Okay.
Now,
How about you?
is
Yeah,
he a
everything's good.
chipmunk or just me?
Well, I think I only heard the chipmunk when I had you on the screen. So, I mean, I'll have to do some more research and get back to you on
Okay.
that.
You know, I hear you're big into research these days, buddy.
Well, only with chipmunks.
Okay, well, that's good. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just picked up a new book, Psychodynamic Psychiatry. It comes out of, I think, a recent journal that started in 2012.
Hmm.
And just in talking about some of the evidence-based research for psychodynamic therapy and psychiatry. So it's been an interesting read. I just started it actually last night. So
Great. Cool.
what would be your favorite book that you would recommend to our students besides your two? That would help them with therapy.
You know, I mean, there's probably. Hey, John. I mean, there's a couple of ways to answer that question.
Yeah.
One way to answer that question would be to, well, actually, there's three different answers I would have. One would be if you're looking for some kind of clinical text. You know, in the there's the Norton Publishers has a library, a series library on interpersonal neurobiology, and I think, and there are now probably close to 40 volumes in that library. But one author who I found to be really a good writer is a guy named Louis Cozolino, who you guys may know. He's been at Pepperdine for a while, and he has written 2 or 3 books. One called the Neuroscience of Relationships, the Neuroscience of Human Relationships.
Oh.
And then he's done one called The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy. And so those two that he's written, I think are, you know, for people who are aspiring psychotherapists, I think are really, they're practical, concrete, with great explanations about the neuroscience. But what I would say is that, like, you know, I had this conversation with somebody this past weekend who wanted, you know, to really learn this stuff. I was doing a talk, and there was a therapist who mentioned, like, how can I become immersed in this? I said one of the most effective ways to do it is to force yourself to teach it. Find 2 or 3 other people that are interested in learning it, and and like you lead the charge of reading a chapter together, and you're being the one who teaches that, and then, you know, extend your boundary. Find some other folks who are eager but who don't know much about it, and put yourself in a position where you have to be responsible for the information, but also you're not just trying to transfer information. You're also trying to apply this in your own professional and personal life. So that would be, so Cozolino's work is one. I think I'm also a person who thinks that reading really, really good biographies or really good fiction is another way to do that. There, you know, I turn people to, there's a British writer by the name of Susan Howich who wrote a series of fictional novels, right?
Fabulous.
So, yeah, so I turn people to that. That's one. And then, you know, I think that there are, you know, I don't know about you guys, I've found the work of you know, people like Henry Nouwen to be really useful when it comes to, you know, imagining or putting our psychotherapy, you know, under the lens of a Christian anthropology more explicitly. But in all this, I think the biggest thing that we try to do with folks is invite them to expand their imagination. I mean, I think we're so used to, you know, we come to trainings and I'm kind of like downloading this, and I feel like I'm just going to make a one-to-one contribution. You give to me, and then I'm going to give to whoever I'm giving this to. When in fact, I think it's it's a greater challenge, but I think it's a more exciting thing to do, to really do the hard work of imagining, what else can I do with this? How else can I take what John has taught me, for instance, or, you know, what Scott has taught me, and put this through the lens of the biblical narrative and expand on this and take a risk at doing that and checking that out with folks. I think that's, and that is something that we have to practice doing. It's not like, pardon me, it's not like, well, John has the gift of doing that, and so he does that, but I just take this in a one-to-one ratio and transfer the information. Imagination is as a muscle to be exercised.
Well, great. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
John, I warmed them up. He's all yours, buddy.
Hey, Kurt.
Hey, John.
I have a special affinity for Dr. Kurt Thompson's class because he lives in a part of the country I've got a lot of love for. I'm from North Carolina and lived there through my college years, and he's in Falls Church, Virginia, which is a hop, skip, and a jump. And so it means he eats the right food, which is mainly fatty. Guys, you probably read the bio, I hope you have, but Kurt Thompson is a well-known psychiatrist in the area with private practice, but also a speaking relationship as well as writing, and has also kind of been a pioneer in the world of not only interpersonal neurobiology, but also how that interacts with the Christian faith. He's a founder of the organization Being Known, has written Anatomy of the Soul, which is a classic work, and others like that. And so, Kurt, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Indeed.
Well, let me kind of hark back to your time last year when you were at our kickoff on Skype, and I don't know, you couldn't see it because you were on Skype, but the whole class was like going psycho because you were sort of pointing out the things that we've been learning, mainly when you said, well, you know, we have an individual private practice, but we found that group is really powerful, and because we put our students through all these groups experiences, and the students will, wow, he likes group. So could you tie that in to how the power of the group, I just thought it was so wonderful when you did that, how the power of the group affects the interpersonal growth standpoint on your biological perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we only here in our practice continue to grow in our persuasion of the role that those communities play, and the power that they have in transforming people. What I think I'll do, it's only recently have I kind of thought, okay, to me, I think that when people enter into group experiences, there is a bit of a three-phase way in which people like enter into groups and then begin to contribute, be in groups. And of course, we tell people technically they're entering into group therapy. What we talk about once we're in these groups is we talk about that we are really developing confessional communities, and by confession we mean the full and most robust use of that term. We're not just talking about I'm here to confess sin, but to confess is to like tell truly the entirety of my story, and that will include all of that I long for, all that I'm grieving. But also this awareness of the presence of other relationships that are profoundly transforming me, even as I'm talking about my longing and my grief. So these three phases, I would say, is that most people, when we introduce this notion to them, most people think about entering into a group as it's going to be this place that I come to and bring into it my life from the outside. So I'm here to work on my marriage. I'm here to work on my substance abuse or my anxiety disorder, my depression, my parent, whatever that thing is. And I tend to think that I'm coming to this thing where, not unlike classroom education, I'm going to come and get something from this, and I'm going to take it with me and apply it to this thing that's outside. And that's not untrue.
Like there's some skill I'm going to pick up here.
That's right. And again, I think that people do pick up skills. Sure. But they come to the group, and that's phase one, and this is how we invite people to come into the door. But one of the first things that we also tell people is, I'll tell a patient, look, I don't think group is just going to be good for you. I think you're going to be good for the group, but not primarily because of your wisdom and insight and suggestions that you're going to bring. Although those things we expect to be useful, the most powerful thing that you're going to bring to the group is your vulnerability. And of course, for many people, this does not immediately make sense.
Because vulnerability is seen as a negative, not as a gift.
It is understood as like to be vulnerable is to be weak. It is to be vulnerable. It is to be at risk. It is not, right, exactly. It's not seen as the Genesis writer at the end of chapter 2 sees it, like to be naked, to be vulnerable in this sense, is one of the two primary states that are necessary for systems, more than like 2 people systems, 3 people systems, to create beautiful, durable objects. We do this most profoundly when we are vulnerable and when shame does not have the talking stick, when it's not a major part of the conversation. And so people come to access information, skill sets, and so forth. And before you know it, though, because they come recognizing that we're going to invite them to be vulnerable, they start to talk about emotional states, of course, and this is part of what my colleague and I are going to help to foster in this space as they tell the truth about the things that are most fundamental to their life experience. And what they come to find is that even though there are, in a group of 8 patients, even though there are 8 different stories which have very different details, they start to discover that there is common ground in the emotional experience and tenor and tone of all those stories. Your shame may come from a different place than mine does, but we both know what that's like. Our guilt, our joy, our expectation, our conflicts, all those kinds of things. And so then we discover, oh, I'm coming here actually not just to work on this thing that's outside the group, my story that's out here. I'm coming and I'm noticing that I have this connection with this group of people. I'm not just the group isn't just this inert thing that I come to and then I leave, taking my skill set with me. It's something that I'm being drawn to because I'm being deeply connected to this group of people emotionally. And then at some point, the transition moves into this third phase. And the third phase is what happens when people are willing to be vulnerable deeply enough for a long enough period of time that they stop working so hard to be nice to everybody. Yes. And they become increasingly more and more and more of who they are when they're at home. More and more when they're yelling at their kids. More and more of when the parts of them that show up, that they're working really, they might talk about those parts. They might say, yeah, there's this part of me that feels ashamed or that gets angry, but that's different than allowing that angry part of me to actually be in the room. And before you know it, we come to find out that what I'm really here to do is to work on the relationships that I have with the people that are in the room. That's what I'm primarily here to do. And because of that, I'm now recognizing that I have this third phase, that the work of the group is really not primarily about bringing something from the outside in to work on. The work of the group is I'm here to work on these relationships. And what we come to find out is that in so doing, the byproduct of this changes everything that is outside of my group.
Yeah, there's this sort of inflection point when they're still in the I'll take my new wisdom and skills to the outside world, and I'd be curious to see how you notice when it moves, the focus gets moved toward the interior relationship. Do you bring it out more? Do you enhance it? Do you say, sound like you had a reaction when she said that? Because that's kind of part of what our job is let's bring it about the relationship. How do you make that inflection point?
Right. What we are able to do most of the time is we are able to typically, and this is part of what is helpful about having 2 therapists in the room. Part of, and I can't say enough about the value of that. From the very beginning, we are both talking with folks about, we're both naming the things that we feel, while we are simultaneously talking about the process. So there is this experience of having a process that's happening, right, where someone expresses something, and then we may pause and say, can we just talk about what happened here? And this is something that, again, is, these aren't like the typical conversations that happen at cocktail parties, right? We're not having a conversation with people and then we say, hey, can we just pause and have a conversation about what we just talked about here? I
call it processing the process.
Exactly. And the thing is, this notion of, as we name the things that we're experiencing, we are bringing everything to greater and greater levels of awareness of consciousness. I'm far more able to make intentional choices that I really want to make with the things that I'm actually aware of that I'm making choices about. One of the things that we say about the way the brain works, of course, is that so much of what we do day in and day out, is done on autopilot. And the fact that we are on autopilot it means that what we sense, what we image, and what we feel is often lost to us. That we are having experiences in which we are, like, with intention, naming what we feel, and in the context of these groups, pointing out things like, gosh, we see your body posture. We notice expressions on your face. We're naming nonverbal cues. We're naming a lot of these kinds of things, is really giving people the opportunity to become increasingly aware of what they are aware of. And the more they are aware of more of what they're aware of, the more able they are to live in real time and space, being real agents. I can choose to restrain what I was about to say to you because I'm aware that I'm actually feeling something, such that when I now go home, I can actually say to my wife, gosh, when you said that, I think I found myself feeling really defensive. And I wanted to say X, Y, and Z, but I'm working really hard to do something different, which changes those dynamics significantly. I think one of the other things that we find in these groups that is, I'm working on a new book project that is really looking at this question of human desire and the interpersonal neurobiology of that, and how so many of our symptoms that we experience are really about truncated desire. Yeah. Our symptoms are really about, I have a longing for, you name it, and it's being sheared off. It has been unmet in some way, shape, or form. And one of the things that we typically tend to do, of course, is, I mean, people come to see us, John, because of pathology, right? They have problems. They don't come to say, gosh, I just want to let you know, and I'm going to pay you your money to tell you how great my life is. Right. They're not doing that, but instead, they typically tend to understand their life through the lens of pathology. One of the questions that we are practicing asking patients within the first couple of visits that they're here is not just, what's your understanding of the nature of your problem? Rather, what's the nature of the thing you want to make that is going to be new when this is all said and done? And we keep coming back to this question of, what is the new thing that you want to make? What do you want? What do you desire? And of course, this question, when it happens in a group setting, gets asked in terms of, Bill, what do you really want from Sarah right now? And of course, this is not something that people are typically being asked in their daily lives. What do you want? But we hearken people back to Jesus' first words in the Gospel of John, right? It's not repent. It is, what do you want, that he says to the Baptist's disciples. And this notion that the God of creation is a God who's seriously interested in us engaging in a conversation in which he's asking the question, what do you want? And having us answer that, I think, is a key element in leading people toward shifting the focus of their attention away from where most of their autopiloted shame takes them and taking them to a different, more conscious area that I would say is located in the right prefrontal cortex of the brain.
This book is going to be important because when you said that, my free association, Kurt, was, and at the same time, as you help them to unearth desire or unearth passion or longings, I'm sure it's got to also help with the resolution of whatever pathology they brought in.
I think, you know, I'm hoping so, John. You know, it's funny, the number of blank looks that we sometimes receive from patients, right? I'm here to work on my marriage. I'm here to work on this and that and so forth and so on. We are a people, I mean, not unlike Adam and Eve, not unlike Cain, which Jesus, when God comes to ask the question, where are you? When he asks the question, where is your brother? When he asks the question, what do you want? We're so wrapped around the axle of shame that it's very, very difficult for us, even when we are being pursued by people who want to open connection with us. It's very difficult for us to imagine that that's really something that's true because, you know, as I remember the last time I was involved in any kind of intimate connection, something bad happened. I mean, that's what my brain keeps telling me. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one of the things too then that we see in this group setting, we keep finding that, there are lots of people who express desire and longing. I long for my marriage to be this and that. I long for that don't quickly get realized. But one of the things that is important is that every time they come back to group, you're going to have someone who's able to say to you, what you're wanting is completely valid. This makes complete sense to me. And at the end of the day, what I'm most deeply desiring is to know that whoever I happen to be is someone you want to be with in the room, including all my desires, including all my shame, even if I'm not getting what I want, which of course leaves me feeling still pretty imperfect, and that you will come back to this same room and say, tell me again what it is that you want, and not leave the room with your hair on fire. We cannot put a price on that, and I think that becomes the hard deck on which any and all kind of healing begins for us. We talk about that when we talk about a therapeutic alliance with individual counselors. I think what we see in group settings is that quite literally the impact that sitting with a room of 6 or 8 people has on my neural network payload is very different than just sitting with one person. I can sit with one person and have them express things to me. If I'm sitting with 8 people who are in that combination, creating a space of welcome for me, it does far more for the neural circuitry activation processes of my brain than it does when I'm just sitting with one person.
It's almost like so much of your work is bringing another level of understanding to the word family. Like we talk about at the Institute, we talk about the family of origin, we call it the FOO, and then we talk about the family of God, which is the reparative function of several people who surround you with grace, surround you with non-shaming, and this sort of thing, and they kind of resolve the things that the family of origin caused. And when you said that about the power of 8 people, I think about the multiplicity of healthy family nutrients that they're providing for the person.
Right, and I think I think you're naming it as it really is. I mean, I think that in the 3rd chapter of Mark and other places in the gospel where Jesus basically reframes the notion of family when he asks, "Who is my brother? Who is my mother?" The one who does the will of my Father. And I think that what we see that happens in these confessional communities is that people are routinely surprised by the capacity of a number of things happening. Number one, they're surprised at the degree to which their story is told effectively when they hear other people tell their stories.
Yes.
They become surprised at how they find themselves feeling things emotionally that they didn't know because they're hearing other people express that emotion for them. They become surprised at how hard it is for them to name what it is that they want explicitly. One of the things that's and my colleague is especially good at this. We're all pretty good at kind of staying in the vagary of the abstract as we're talking about things. And so she might ask, what is it that you really want? And they might say something general like, well, I want my marriage to be better. And she'll say, no, what is it that you want here in the group? And they'll say, well, I suppose I just want to be accepted. No, what do you want from Mark in particular? And of course, then they'll say, then they'll still want to talk to her to say, no, I want you to tell Mark what it is that you want. And of course, there is this ascending march toward intimacy that we will often actually invite folks to pause and just pay attention to what they're feeling in their body, noticing. What you're doing right now feels really difficult. This is really hard. This would have been the kind of thing that would have been really good when you were 3 and 5 and 10 and 15 years of age. Had somebody been the family for you that we're really trying to be here in this time. And along the way, when these kinds of things happen experientially, we do our best to try to also add to that what we're learning is taking place from an interpersonal neurobiological perspective. So we talk and off. There's some didactic stuff that happens along the way as well.
Absolutely, which I think is why you're making such a contribution, because you so blend the affect with the brain functioning with the cognitive aspect, and it's just beautiful. So Guys, you just heard one of the guys on the cutting edge here, and Kurt's, he's on the East Coast, so he's got to get home, but he's elected to answer your question for a few minutes. So, Scott, let's bring in our questioners to take advantage of Kurt's expertise.
Okay, they're starting to come on. Brenda will be the first one, so she is hopefully coming. Okay, there we go. I have an excerpt from Brene Brown on vulnerability that I'm going to play for the students after we're done, while we're on break, that reinforces what you just said. So those are really helpful. Okay, Brenda.
Are you having light problems in your house?
Light show behind her.
Are you are you okay? Is there lightning in the house or something? Or
Can you hear me?
yeah.
I am flashing. I am flashing. I don't know why. Can I ask my question and then maybe sometimes this happens with my recording. I apologize. Do you want me to ask or you want me to carry on?
I think Kurt's fine.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not being blinded by the light. It's fine. I mean, a little strobe action with psychotherapy never hurt anyone.
It stopped. It stopped. So
Very
cool.
good,
Okay.
very good. Yeah, indeed.
I'm Brenda Puckett from northern Kentucky near Cincinnati, Ohio. Kurt, I have been to a few Seasons weekends and have just read both of your books. Not just, trying to stay focused here. My question is on, well, first I do have to say thank you because Anatomy of the Soul literally has transformed my immediate family, is transforming. The Soul of Shame is new and is just like opening so many things. And that's my question is, when there's been, for clients who have trauma and that affects their mentalization, where they can't mentalize, do you have any suggestions for, or I should say they can't mentalize well, for going through that process of, in your book you talk about it, how it is a work that we have to do, and it's perseverance and changing those things. And the more that we scorn shame, I had to look up the definition of scorn and how much that really, that's huge, to do that with shame, get that out of there.
Right.
Anyway, just any suggestions for how to work on increasing mentalization. And then I also just, this, what we pay attention to, we remember, and what we remember
becomes our anticipated future, right? Yeah.
If you can say anything to that, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
Yeah, well, I think that they're both really just great reflections. So thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for your kind words. Regarding the mentalization, one of the a couple things. One is to remember that we live in a world. We who are doing work with patients we get this, but like we still live in a world of the internet and Amazon and McDonald's, and we want things delivered actually now before we order them, right? And so the notion that things actually take a long time, that practice is what makes permanent, and that we don't just do things one time and then expect that to deliver for us what we need. So one thing I would say is that the mentalization process for those who have developed secure attachment in newborns and infants is taking place when your neuroplasticity is really pretty at a high watermark, right? You're pretty flexibly able to do that. So one thing to bear in mind is that it's really important to help people do things that are going to enable their brain to be more neuroplastically flexible. So in both of the books, we talk about what you can do to enhance neuroplasticity. There's lots of things that we can do about that. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that the central nervous system tends, in general, to work bottom to top and right to left. And and the reason that that's important is we live in a world where a lot of our psychotherapy historically has been left to right and top to bottom through a lot of cognitive work and so forth and so on. But the brain, we like to say it's really useful if we work with the brain in the way the brain actually likes to work with itself. And so hence you get a lot of work like from Pat Ogden and others, and Bessel van der Kolk, the whole notion of paying attention primarily to what the body is sensing, and then eventually using our prefrontal cortices as a way to both attune to that, but then also to regulate that. So when it comes then to mentalization, this notion that we can actually imagine what's going on in somebody else's mind, which is what Fonagy's notion of mentalization is all about, sometimes it's just helpful to ask people questions to talk about that. So when I'm in the office, I will ask a patient, what do you imagine is going on in my mind? And for many of them, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And you're right, because you haven't had much practice being able to do this. So let's start with some basics. What do you notice as you look at me as we're talking here? And of course, they might have no idea what you're talking about until you say, tell me what you see on my face. Tell me what I look like. Tell me what the tone of my voice is like. Tell me what my body posture looks like. Do I look like someone who's actually enjoying being in the room with you? So, and then I want to say, and some of this then also, we include questions about, we do this procedure called the body scan, where we help them practice being increasingly aware of what they're actually sensing in their own physicality. And then I will say, so tell me, what's the picture in your mind? What's the picture in your mind? Tell me what the picture in your mind is of what's actually happening in my mind. What do you imagine? Now, I want you to close your eyes. You can't see me, you can hear me, and I want you to imagine what it is that I'm feeling as we talk here in the room. So we're doing all kinds of things to give them opportunities to begin to stretch their imagination and have it reach out to what someone else is actually experiencing, thinking, feeling, and so forth. Another thing that we really think is important for people to be doing, and this, one of the elements that we know that increases neuroplasticity, is this notion that I call meaningful novelty. What are the new things that we are doing? What are the new endeavors that we're entering into? Are we, and now you might say, like, gosh, I don't have time to do all this. Like, I have a job. I got to go work, right? But are you willing to, like, learn a new art skill, like learn to paint, learn to draw? Are you willing to learn to play a new instrument? Are you willing to learn a foreign language? Are you willing to do these kinds of things that invite the imagination part, like the right parietal, right prefrontal cortex of the brain, to really begin to, like, gain traction? Anytime we're doing anything that enables the brain to imagine things, and I would say imagine anything that are objects of beauty, it enhances their capacity to then begin to imagine anything that they can't necessarily logically, linearly identify. Well, I can't know what you're thinking because you haven't told me with words. But if I'm beginning to, if I send them to the museum and I say, I want you to go look at these paintings, I want you to listen to this music, and I want you to sense, what's the scene that comes to your mind when you hear Holst's middle section of Jupiter? Like, what's the scene that you imagine? So we're really asking people to do very, very fundamental things that, as it turns out, we ask children in elementary school to do. They're the very same things that we tend to do. But because we're adults, we don't think that we would have to help them practice doing these kinds of things. And so it's very basic things that help people start with the bottom of their brain and work north and right to left. And then also giving them things that they can literally hang their right brains on in such a way that it stimulates those things. And then we do other things. So for instance, if you give somebody a gratitude exercise, which I'm sure most of you are doing with patients, to think about something I'm grateful for actually, like, forces me to activate my imagination. it's not just going to present itself to me. Like, I have to imagine, what is this good thing that I have experienced today that I'm really grateful for? This use of my imagination, the activity of this, becomes like, I go to the gymnasium mostly to get strong, but not just for the sake of going to the gym. I do that because I want to play tennis more effectively. I do that because I want to do other things more effectively. That's why I really want to go to the gym. I mean, we can go to the gym for whatever reason, but I think you get the point. We're doing things to exercise and activate and access the right hemisphere, connecting it to their bodies in order for them to then begin practicing mirroring that. We give them the exercise of going to the mirror once a day, and I want you to spend 60 seconds. I want you to look at yourself in the mirror, and then I want you to write. I want you to write out, what is it that you see? What is it that you sense just when you look at your face? Okay, you see your face, you sense what you're sensing. Now I want you to begin to, I want you to pick 3 people the next day, and I don't want you to talk to them, but like when you're on the subway, when you're like standing in line at Burger King, whatever I want you to find 3 faces, and I want you to, with intention, look at them. Don't look weird. Don't make it be weird, right? You don't want them to catch you looking at them, right? That would be, then you'd be back in my office. But you want them to do that in order for them to practice imagining. So what do you imagine that person is thinking, sensing, feeling? That's a long-winded answer. I'm sorry, I could be untethered.
That was the right question. You elicited a lot of what Kurt's knowledge is, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Cameron, you're up.
All right. Hello, Dr. Thompson. I'm actually asking you this question from just across the river.
Wow.
So, one, I appreciate the return of the prodigal son.
Oh, wow. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Grateful.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you.
You know, an allusion to my favorite Nowen book. But
Mm.
anyway, so from an interpersonal neurobiological standpoint, what do you seem to be most helpful in treating clients with complex trauma? Is group therapy usually best, or do you have you know, more complex criteria that you work through before getting to that sort of decision?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that we are upfront with patients about is that you actually have to qualify to be in groups.
Okay.
There are 2 kinds of groups that we run here in our practice. One group is a time-limited group, runs for about 9 months. It just so happens that they are a men's group and a women's group that do this pretty much on the academic year. And there is a curriculum that we provide. There's a fair amount of didactic work that goes on in that, but they still have a fair amount of processing that they do. We screen them for those kinds of groups, but they still need to be able to, what we would say, self-regulate their affect.
Okay.
Right. So that means that for whatever reason, they need to be able to, they can certainly feel things as strongly as they want to, but they need to be able to not be throwing lamps in the room. They need to, right, not be shouting expletives, right? They need to be able to regulate things while, you know, still being able to express what it is that they feel.
Right.
They need to be able to not dissociate. They need to be not actively abusing substances or pornography, so forth and so on. And so I think the question then becomes, well, for anyone with complex trauma, where are they in the process of affect regulation? That's really the question.
Okay.
If they're able to do that on their own, then I think groups can become powerful supportive mechanisms for them while they're continuing to do other kinds of individual group EMDR work, a range of different things, neurofeedback work, a lot of different stuff that people are doing. So, yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more that we could say about that, but I think it's not an either-or answer, but they do need to be able to regulate their affect.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
You're
Cameron.
welcome.
Dara.
Hi, guys. I'm Dara. I'm in Baker City, Oregon. And my question for you is, how do you normally talk with your clients who don't want to take psychiatric medications because they have a Christian perspective and think that it's either not godly or God's going to heal them? So, you know, they have like major depression or psychosis, but they're not wanting to take meds.
Right. Well, for a psychiatrist, that sometimes can be the $50 million question, right? If I can't get them to take my drugs, then I'm going to be out of a job. So here's I don't know if this will be helpful or not. First of all, I tell patients once we've addressed questions about A, medical necessity, B, potential side effects, recognizing that the drugs are not going to be harmful and that they're okay to take, which takes all of about 10 to 15 minutes to do. Beyond that, we say anything else that we're talking about that the patient finds to be conflicting about taking the drug has got nothing to do with the drugs. It's got nothing to do with medication. It has to do with issues of trust. It has to do with relationships. It has to do with the sense that could I potentially be doing something wrong that either God or somebody else is going to be upset with me about because I'm not doing things the way I'm supposed to be doing them. That's all about shame talking, right? It's got nothing to do with drugs. Now, I mean, different people have by the time they get to me, they're, the fact that they're actually in my office for the most people means they're willing to at least come a little ways out onto the diving board, right? They may not be standing on the end, but they've come out a little ways. And so one of the things that we talk about is this notion that pharmacology is essentially a technology. And so I then make the comparison that I give them a couple of comparisons. The first comparison is I say, like, look, pharmacology is like your shoes. And of course, that makes no sense to people. But what I tell people is this, like, you're not born with shoes. You don't have to wear shoes. Now, in our culture, we now have a culture in which you actually have to wear shoes because we build our world assuming that people do wear shoes. But there are people in the world who don't and who choose not to and who don't want to. There are a lot of good reasons for wearing shoes, but no one to date has ever come to me and said, Kurt, I think that you're wearing shoes just as a way to protect yourself, and I think you just need to pray about that. I think that if you prayed more, I think you would be far more patient, despite the fact that, of course, you'd be an irascible cuss by the end of the day if you weren't wearing shoes. Nobody says this to me about shoes, but I say, like, look, shoes are a technology, just like pharmacology is. And then I ask the question, it's curious to me why it is in the 9th chapter of John, and it's not the only place, why doesn't Jesus just say to the blind man, be healed? Why does he have to use a technology? Why does he have to use mud as a go-between? So this raises the question of, like, well, how do we understand the material world in general and so forth? And, we're not trying to, kind of overhaul patients' entire plausibility structures or worldviews or whatever, but we are saying, look, for me, my understanding of what I'm trying to do with patients is to enable them to be people that, at the end of the day, their life is going to reflect greater love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That's really the plumb line at the end of the day. And the difference between Prozac and cocaine is that at the end of the day, they're much more likely to bear fruit of the Spirit and will do so continually, taking Prozac and wearing their shoes. And at the end of the day, cocaine is not going to get them the same result. And in that way, we say that, like, this is part of what it's doing, right? It is a technology that enables you to do things. And then I say it's kind of like standing in a swimming pool where the water, you're standing at a depth that is just over your nose. So you can stand on tiptoes and you can survive, but it's not going to be very fun. Pharmacology raises the floor of the pool. It does not teach you to swim. And so no one's going to be in a position of not needing to do psychotherapy, not needing to conduct spiritual formation, not needing to look into what we would call sanctification just because we're taking medication. But we can say that there are lots of things that God has given to us that we form from the earth technologically that enable us to live lives that are more fruitful. Again, that's long-winded. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Dara.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Hi, Anthony. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks. Appreciate, Kurt, what you've shared. I'm Anthony Johnson. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. And thank you. I'm thinking off the top of my head here, as you've been sharing, because I've had some familiarity with Ultimate Leadership and the groups that I experienced there, and of course, the groups that we've been experiencing through the Townsend experience to this point. And so as I think about what I imagine to be pre-fall interaction and fellowship applied to groups, how in the world do we take what has been your experience, my personal experience in groups, how do we take that into, everyday life? I hear that there's a divide between, the clinical and the lay experience, but it seems like the type of real, unhindered, vulnerable interaction is the way it was intended. So, again, I'm thinking off the top of my head. So,
yeah, no, again, a great question. In some respects, I try to address this in the last two chapters of The Soul of Shame. In that, first of all, I would say anything that we're doing that includes our answering God's call to partner with Him to co-create a world of goodness and beauty, right? We're practicing for this new heaven and new earth. Anything that we do in that regard is going to be anathema to evil. It's going to meet stiff resistance. And there will be plenty of places where we're going to try things and it's going to seem like it's not working at all. This notion that, and so the first thing I would say is, like, to do this is hard work. I'm recalling Paul Borgman's book, Genesis, the Story We Haven't Heard, in which he talks about Abraham's journey with God into Palestine. And he said, like, Borgman, I think, correctly writes and asks the question, who knows how many people God tried to partner with before Abraham finally stepped up and agreed? We don't know because there's no story there. Who knows how many disciples Jesus asked to join him before he finally got Andrew, Peter, James, John to say yes? We know that he had others that he asked that said, no, I got to go bury my father, and so forth and so on. I think it's, first of all, fair to say that God knows exactly how hard it is to get people to enter into conversations. If God himself couldn't get Adam and Eve to do it, if Jesus himself was having a hard time getting people to enter into it, I think that they would know that, like, this is hard to do. So that's number one. But number two, I do believe it's doable. And I think that we do it. I think we have models for this, in that we would ask this question. Okay, if I am a teacher, if I'm in a school, if I work in a software engineering company, if I work in a law firm, if I work as a carpenter, I'm going to have conversations with people around my vocational practice. What are the things, and then we do this here in our own practice. I mean, it's not just that we do this with our patients, but when we have our staff meetings, we have to ask, we say we can't give to patients what we don't have. We need to be able to, in our common vocational places, be able to name with vulnerability all of the things that are pertinent to the work that we do together. So that doesn't mean necessarily that in our practice, in our staff meetings, we're necessarily going to be talking about our our own life story, our parents and so forth and so on, or our marriages. But it does mean that the things that we feel and that we sense that are happening, that about which we feel vulnerable here in this practice, about anything that has to do with this, we're going to put that stuff on the table. If I'm in any kind of setting in which I'm a leader, I might say, look, I want to create a culture in which, we're not necessarily, again, talking about absolutely everything in our life, but that anything that has to do with the work that we do here, we really want to be able to talk about that with vulnerability. We want to talk about the things that we long for in our schoolwork that we're doing together as teachers. And at the same time, talk about the places where we feel our grief and our shame and so forth and so on, recognizing that the more we actually do that, and this is, I think, ultimately, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, John, I think ultimately the power of what happens in groups hinges on this notion that if it's true that the first couple before Genesis 3 is standing on the precipice of great creativity, that one of the things that evil does with shame is not, it doesn't just make us feel bad about ourselves. Its intention is to devour us. Its intention is to shear off our capacity to create as we were made to create. As such, when we are with one another in groups such that our shame is exposed in a safe environment where it can be received, where proper boundaries are kept, confidentiality is kept, my brain discovers that it is now no longer by itself with this stuff that I carry. And the very act of not being by myself transforms the very neural network circuitry that is correlated with my shame. Over time, what that means is that I am literally burning less energy neurobiologically, managing those shame networks, and that energy is now available to me to take the kinds of risks, to make the kinds of things that I want to make, but not just because I, Kurt, now have the courage to go and do it by myself, but because I sense that when I go, I'm not going by myself. I'm taking the group with me. I'm taking my practice with me back into see this client. I'm taking my colleagues with me back into the classroom. I'm going to be doing life in this sense. I'm not going to be my myself. And so when Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 12 about like you are the body, this notion that this word you is not just individually, like it is a corporate you. Tonight, in one of our groups, I'll just wrap up with this. In one of our groups, we had one of those rare things happen where in our process group, which is an ongoing group, we said goodbye to a member. A member, for a number of reasons, was having to leave the group. And people aren't happy about it. People they're sad about it. And one of the things that one of the other members was talking about was like, can we have a relationship outside the group later? Because we've developed this relationship now over 18 months, 2 years practically. And I don't want to lose this. I don't want to miss this. And we pointed out that it's easy for us to think that we can just have these singular relationships in the group context that is just between me and that other person, while forgetting that the reason that I have the relationship that I have is because the group supports it. It's because it's taking place in that context. We who live in the West live such individualized lives in the privacy of our mind that we fail to recognize that this is not how our brains were made to operate. Our brains were made to operate in the context of deeply committed community, and it is in that context that we not only flourish more in every vocational domain that we occupy, but we also become the city on the hill. We also become the light of the world, the salt of the earth, not just because I'm doing this as an individual, but because I'm deeply connected to other people who are both enhancing my ability to do that on my own, but only because I know that I'm not really doing it on my own.
Thanks, Anthony. Kurt,
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for sort of showing us the power of the true internalization of grace and truth relationships. That was just wonderful. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Guys, get Kurt Thompson's books, get on his website, and as you can see, he is always contributing new stuff as he learns and grows himself. He's a perpetual learner. Kurt, are you going to be at AACC this September in Nashville?
I will. Thanks for asking. Will you be there?
I'll be there.
Very good.
We'll grab a cup of Joe and talk.
Love to. Thanks, John.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Kurt Thompson. Guys, we're going to take our bio break. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll wrap up with a bunch of questions. See you in a few.
Okay.